Hi, hello, and welcome back to a podcast where I talk about going from corporate drone to corporate dropout and everything in between when it comes to being a fitness and gaming creator and small business owner. You know it, you love it. Welcome back to Chaos and Fuckery. And there quite honestly might be a lot of chaos in this episode because my cats have decided my office is right exactly where they need to be right now as I'm recording this. So we might get some cat visits, which is fine because I get cat visits on my streams. And today we're talking about Switch 2. Was it a failed console launch? Did it actually succeed? Did the boycotts work? What is going on in the gaming world, especially when it comes to Nintendo? And the reality is despite multiple people screaming that you should just go buy a Steam Deck and forget about Nintendo and that their prices are absolutely over ridiculous and crazy, Nintendo nonetheless succeeded. And yes, you have every right to disagree with Nintendo and their way of doing things. At the end of the day, when it comes to prices, inflation is inflation. The price of the console, it kept up with inflation, realistically. So a $450 console, $500 console if you get the bundle, isn't that absurd, especially given that Nintendo could have, been further greedy and further asshole-like and completely slapped us with whatever tariffs Japan was slapped on to acquire the consoles that we know and love, even after they announced the pricing of the Switch 2. They could have done that. They didn't. But at the end of the day, statistically, the Switch has been one of the fastest selling consoles to date. And I bought one. As a content creator that also plays a lot of Nintendo games, I figured getting a launch Switch 2 when my Switch 1 was already falling apart, and I want to get into the super secret thing you're not supposed to talk about when it comes to Nintendo consoles with my Switch 1. I needed a new, not only handheld, but console that I can play my Nintendo games on that didn't require me to constantly replace my controller. And while I did just get a new Pro-Con controller, this controller also works with my Switch 2, so it was a benefit to me to be able to buy a controller that worked for both in the case that I need to use both in my streaming environment. At the end of the day, for a lot of the people that bought launch Switch 2s that aren't just your average creator, it was a business expense and kind of necessary to do their jobs. Yes, there are many people that are screaming about boycotting Nintendo and the awful things that they've done and how they, priced people out of the fun hobby that they once did. But the reality is building a PC that, Steam and a Steam Deck would be useful to pair together is also expensive for your average consumer. Most people have been priced out at this point of being able to build a gaming PC. I built mine before the most recent generation of graphics cards was announced, but I did have the newest at that point in time, which is the 4080, I think is what I have. I have the GeForce NVIDIA 4080, I think. I can't remember, but whatever was latest before this current generation, that's what I have in mind, and I built my PC from scratch with an Asus motherboard and everything else, with all of my specs, including 64 gigs of RAM. My PC cost me well over $3,000 to build. I would much rather buy a $450 console than a $3,000 PC on top of, whatever the cost of a Steam Deck is. And from my understanding, you can't utilize a Steam Deck without having a Steam account. And who really buys games on Steam that doesn't already own a PC? On top of that, there's a whole different generation of games that are Nintendo exclusives. Yes, games are becoming less and less exclusive to a specific platform. Look at something like Kingdom Hearts. When it was originally created, it was a PlayStation exclusive. In the most recent generation of games, Kingdom Hearts 3 and any of the other side quests have all been multi-platform gaming, and now you even have the 1.5 and 2.5 remix on PC, which up until that launch happened, it was pretty much an exclusive console-only game. And yes, Nintendo had a few of the Kingdom Hearts games along the way, but the main series of games, 1 and 2, were PlayStation exclusives. And then you look at Halo. Halo is an Xbox exclusive. So there has always been platform exclusive games, but Nintendo has probably the most and still existing lineup of exclusive to their console games. You are getting more and more console or more games, especially with the Switch 2, that are supportable on the Nintendo Switch 2, but you can't take something like, say, Mario Party or Mario Kart World, which was a launch title, and I'll talk about that later on in this episode as well. You can't take those games and put them on something like PlayStation. Yes, a lot of people have done emulators of games like Pokemon and the older generations that were on Game Boy Advance, but at the end of the day, you couldn't really take Nintendo IP away from Nintendo. The reason Super Nintendo World at the theme parks is rivaling theme park land and theming to that of Harry Potter and needing more expansions already, just like Potter expanded, is because Nintendo holds a level of nostalgia and a generational level of interest from grandfathers to grandkids, and even beyond that in some cases, is why the Switch 2 launch was successful. It's not just girl cozy gamers wanting to play Animal Crossing and Stardew Valley. It is also Mario people, Pokemon people, and other Nintendo IP diehards of the like. Smash Ultimate, Kirby. Nintendo has been able to create a world of different characters that also sometimes cross over in a way that I don't believe any other console environment has. And honestly, I don't feel that a lot of the world building in Steam PC based games has existed that are exclusive PC games either. So Nintendo has that unique thing in front of them. They have massive IPs like Pokemon that are exclusive to Nintendo. And Legend of Zelda even. There are rumors that Zelda will get its own theme park adaptation, and that would drive even more people to the Super Nintendo worlds of the theme park realm. And that is why the Switch 2 was successful. As a creator who also plays a lot of Nintendo games now and has always been a Pokemon kid, I feel that the hate for the Switch 2 is forced. I do, absolutely do. And it's not just about pricing, and yes, I understand a lot of people can't afford to buy a Switch 2 right now. And yes, Nintendo has notoriously always been behind on the graphics and processing power side of consoles. That has never not been a thing. But your demographic between a typical Nintendo player, minus your nostalgia people who still play Pokemon well into their adult years and still play Mario games well into their adult years, your age demographic between, you know, your Call of Duties and your Nintendo gamers is significantly different, and that's why they can get away with the lower processing power and graphics capability. You're not looking for that stuff when you're a kid. You're looking for the whimsy in a game of catching a little creature or platforming your way through these new lands as Mario and friends. At the end of the day, the demographic is different, but the Switch 2, in my experience with it already, has at least caught up. By the time it's about a year old, I'm sure Sony and Windows will be well on to their next console generation because they've had many years of their current PlayStation and Xbox generation, in comparison to the Switch, which took much longer to come out with its next generation. However, I do believe that with that next generation from PlayStation and Xbox, we will see a significant price hike in those consoles, and you'll see them not match with the Switch 2 once again, just like you did with the previous generation with the Switch and whatever the Xbox and PlayStation generation was there. Nintendo is always behind on that front, but Nintendo has also brought capability to the console gaming world that no other console system has done. Nintendo brought us the first movement-based console system. Nintendo brought us the first handheld and console mix. Obviously, we have the Game Boy era as well, where they had both handheld and a regular everyday plug into your TV console, and now they've managed to mix that with their Switch generation of consoles, and no other console has done that. And to that point, PlayStation and Xbox also copied the original Wii concept later in the years as they saw how popular that movement-based, sensor-based console concept was. So Nintendo has been the playground and guinea pig for a lot of these revolutionary gaming concepts, motion-based games, and now the Switch with the ability to switch between console and handheld. And at the end of the day, I don't know that Nintendo will ever not have at least a mildly successful launch ever again. As long as they don't pull another Wii U, because we obviously know that one didn't go so well. For the most part, Nintendo has been able to consistently create good consoles. Are there tech issues with their consoles? Yes. But there was tech issues with the PS5 when it launched as well. So, the Joy-Cons having drift with the first generation, we shall see if we really get issues with them again in this next generation. In theory, we might. We might still see more drift, because from what I understand of the design of the Joy-Cons, we haven't really fixed that problem. However, I would take drift in my Joy-Cons and Nintendo actively doing something about it over my more expensive PlayStation 5 overheating and dying if I have a power outage spontaneously living in Florida. So, while I am not, a person that rides any particular console's ass, I have had Xboxes, I currently own a PS5, I currently own the Switch and Switch 2, and I have a PC. The only thing I haven't bought is a Steam Deck, and honestly, I've had no interest in that because the games I like to play on my PC are not something that I can really go mobile with anyway. That was the whole reason of buying a PC. If it goes mobile, I can just download it on the Switch. But were you, I am interested in the audience here, were you expecting the Switch 2 to flop? Were you a boycotter and said, I absolutely will never buy it? Are you interested in it, but just simply can't afford it? Because I do understand, the $80 games is a huge slap in the face. The console itself, I don't think is that big of a deal. But paying $70 to $80 for a digital game, I believe the digital games should have stayed the original price. And if they needed to up the price of the actual physical cartridges for whatever reason, tariffs, just general hardware shortages, whatever, if they needed to up that, then up it. But I do believe digital through the Nintendo eStore should have stayed the same, especially in a world where you can't always play all of your original games on the new console. Yes, a large majority of the Switch 1 games are now backwards compatible to the Switch 2, but in the case of things like Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild, where you have to pay for that expansion to get the graphics upgrade, I don't think that should have happened. I think just like many of the other Switch 1 games that got a graphics port, like Super Mario Odyssey and Pokemon Scarlet Violet, I don't believe that they should have charged an extra thing for Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom. It sounds like we're getting an expansion to Mario Party Jamboree and the Kirby and the Forgotten Lands. I believe that's the Kirby game that gets the expansion. Either way, it sounds like we're getting actual DLC expansions that you're paying for there, rather than just simply a graphics upgrade. But I don't believe any game that simply just got the HDR port should be costing anything extra. And I do believe the $50, $60 range should have kind of been the cap, especially when you'll never see a discount on most console games. A lot of people want to blame Nintendo for never discounting their content, but PlayStation, in my experience, also is not great unless you are a PS Plus and constantly stocking the games available to you through that, and the discounts available to you on certain games through that as well. PlayStation is not great at discounting their games. With Xbox, you have Game Pass, which is better, but also you can utilize many games that you buy in the Steam environment on a Windows console, as well as vice versa. If you've bought it for Xbox, you can then port said games into Steam and play them cross-platform. From my understanding, I've never actually tried that. If you're an Xbox gamer, let me know. Can you actually do that? I thought that was the whole benefit of, having a Windows console with also having a PC, but I could have just made that up entirely out of my ass. I've only ever owned an Xbox once in my life, and I know very little from what is available on Game Pass, purely from, occasionally picking up the controller of my husband's Xbox. So if I totally spoke out of my ass on that one, please feel free to correct me in the comments, but my point being, is Steam has been the only video game delivery system, shop, if you will, that has allowed massive discounts on games that you want to play, especially with digital environments and not physical games. And I think more digital eShops should follow suit and discount games that aren't selling well, or older games for that matter. So when I go to buy Super Mario Wonder, I shouldn't be paying the new $80 price, I hope, when I buy it when it was originally a Switch 1 game and, now just available to be played on the Switch 2. If that's the case, I'll probably just end up buying it on my Switch 1 and playing it there rather than buying it in the Switch 2 format if I really have to pay the extra $20 simply for a graphics update. Is the Switch 2, per the statistics that are out online, had a extremely successful launch, and honestly, most people have waited a long ass time. Everyone kept saying Switch Pro is coming, Switch Pro is coming, and Nintendo just said, ha! No, you're just gonna get a whole new console, but you're gonna have to wait a few more years. We didn't, other than the OLED, we didn't really get an intermediary or the Switch Lite. We didn't get any upgrade. We got mostly downgrades, cheaper versions, instead of an upgrade to the original Switch system until the Switch 2 came out. So diehard Nintendo fans definitely were ready to go for this launch, and I'm happy to report, though, the Switch 2 launch went a lot smoother than the Switch launch or the PS5 launch. There was not hours of sitting in Best Buy carts and constantly trying to hunt for the Switch 2, which is a good thing for the future of hardware in the gaming industry. They were able to keep up with supply and demand when it comes to building the hardware for an initial launch and not having to constantly look for restocks for people to be able to get the console that they want to enjoy. Now, some may take that and say, well, they overbought what they thought would sell. And others will say they just didn't want to run into the same problem. I am in the camp of they didn't want to run into the same problem. I logged in at midnight on launch day because I was not fighting people for pre-orders, because those did not go well. Pre-orders for the Nintendo Switch 2, like I've talked about in a previous episode, absolutely were horrendous. But many, like myself, just either logged into Walmart online, walked straight into Target, Best Buy, GameStop at midnight on launch, or even early in the morning on launch day, and picked one up and walked straight home and started streaming. Many of the content creators that I watch had mentioned, my pre-order got delayed, so in order to be a part of the first to the entry crowd, I went and bought one that morning or at midnight. And now I have two, which, I don't love that. I don't love that creators are buying more than what they need, especially if they're not going to do a giveaway with their chats or return it and, maybe buy some of the accessories or whatever. If they just have two sitting around their house in the hopes that, maybe there's some special things that you can do later with it so that they have one that's normal and one that's not. I wish they would just allow chat to have, the one that they bought extra rather than hoard a bunch of consoles. Because at this point it sounds like some of these creators have two for themselves, one for their spouse, and maybe one for their kid. And that is not the type of consumption I want to participate in. If you do intend on using multiple consoles, great. Have multiple of the same console for whatever reason that you need it. However, in this case, there is not currently any method of being able to modify that piece of hardware, and there's even some speculation with the new terms of service that if you even try to modify the new Switch 2, you're gonna end up with a bricked console, and that's no fun either. So what is the future of, doing what people have already done with the Switch 1 and modding some of our favorite Nintendo games with the Switch 2? Who knows? We don't know currently. We don't know if anyone will discover a way. I'm sure people will. Everyone figures out a way to hijack something to get what they want out of it. Hackers are notoriously stubborn and will figure it out, I'm sure, but your average everyday user won't need to know that information. And I don't foresee there being a capability of doing that at least for 3 to 6 months, which would give creators plenty of time to acquire a secondary console in the case that they go forward with doing something like that. Which is why, all of yes, it is a part of their job. It is a business expense, obviously. Going out of your way to get one on launch day is one thing, but also not returning or, gifting the one you've already bought in pre-order that got delayed. I do truly hope I see some of these creators giving it away to their chats who have been very vocal, I've noticed in YouTube communities, about saying, hey, we don't have one because we can't afford it. And that brings me, we talked a little bit about the $80 games, and we're talking about Mario Kart World, the launch title that came with the Switch 2, and I think largely a reason Switch 2 was so successful. Yes, we could have seen a lot more launch titles other than Mario Kart and this game tour, whatever. Also, the fact that was $10, that's a total scam. We should have gotten the Nintendo version of Astrobot for completely free, just like not Astrobot, but Astro's Playroom, the prelude to Astrobot, just like we did with PlayStation. We should have got that on the Switch too. There's no reason that should have been a pay-to-play game. Anyways, back to Mario Kart World. I think that is a large reason, and that bundle that was available is a large reason this Switch 2 was successfully launched and bought outside of the creator realm. We haven't seen a new Mario Kart game in over a decade, I think, at this point, and adding a free roam capability alongside new features when it comes to racing alongside friends and doubling the amount of people you can have in a race. Plus, the added silliness of the game chat feature if you're only working with 4 people, which limiting the size of game chat to 4 when your game itself that you can use it on allows you to be online with 24 is a little bit interesting. I don't know that the Switch could handle 24 people in a Discord call, but 4 seems very limiting in any other game to use that game chat camera feature other than, say, Mario Party? Anyways, many were looking forward to Mario Kart because many enjoyed that game and the competitiveness of playing with their families. I know I enjoyed playing that game with friends in college as well as my family growing up. So Mario Kart World was definitely a big seller for me when it came to, do I want to be one of the first people to stream the Switch 2 and buy it and launch it? Am I going to be one of the first people? Was I? No. But, I'll be a part of the pack and do my own little interesting thing with the Knockout Tour feature of the new game. The game is gorgeous. The new mechanics of rail sliding and free roaming and wall running are fun, and they're very reminiscent of one of my husband's favorite games, Forza Horizons. Is it an $80 game? No, not really. But purchased with the bundle where it was only $50? Totally worth it. It's a fun new Mario Kart game that I totally was excited for and absolutely will play a ton of hours of, either on stream, with friends, by myself, handheld, not handheld on the big TV, maybe game chat in the future with other Switch 2 owners. Whatever it is, the game was definitely worth it in the bundle. But what I wish Nintendo would have done alongside Mario Kart was release the Donkey Kong Bonanza game we know we're getting in about a month. Now, I know they wanted to give Mario Kart its moment, so they weren't going to release any major title like that alongside it. However, I am more excited for Bonanza than I was for Mario Kart, and I'm going to have to pay full price for it. I will play Bonanza, and I will probably be one of those crazy creators that are one of the first people to stream it, because I am an East Coaster and the West Coast won't be able to download it even if they've pre-ordered it till midnight. Well, you can always just change your system time, but that's not the point. Bonanza reminds me a lot of Super Mario Odyssey, and I had a ton of fun playing Super Mario Odyssey, and as did my audience, because that was one of the more active streams I've had in recent months. It was my series of playing through Odyssey and doing fitness challenges and walking and all sorts of things that I played through that game, which made that video very hard to edit, but not the point. It looks very similar from a platformer perspective to that game, and I really enjoyed the gameplay, and, Who doesn't love a little Donkey Kong? So I will be probably creating my favorite kind of beverages out of my DK barrel that I got from Epic Universe and playing my way through Bonanza on day one. It'll probably end up being a marathon stream if I'm being completely honest. I will probably try to play the main game all in a day, maybe two, of just non-stop streaming. It'll very much so depend on my schedule, but it's a thought right now. And those two games alone were the reason I bought the Switch 2. But I totally understand people saying that, $80 games is a ripoff because you're never going to see a discount. I totally agree. But that doesn't make Nintendo, not a business. They still have to be able to keep their own profits, and you can say they're greedy and whatever, and they might be. I mean, a lot of big companies are. However, at the end of the day, if we try to evaluate the goodness of everything we put our dollars into, I don't know that any of us would ever spend money on anything. So, in my opinion, if you were boycotting the Switch 2 for, whatever moral high ground you wanted to be on for boycotting it, you have the right to do that, but I'm gonna say it's stupid. If you're if you just didn't get one because you didn't want one, awesome, cool, that's not your thing. If you didn't get one because you can't afford it, good on you for making responsible financial decisions. Unlike me. Yes, it was a business expense, so technically it was responsible, but that's not the point. If you want a Switch 2 in the future, what games are you excited for on the Switch that you might not be able to get on other consoles or on Steam? Because that was the reason I went forward with buying a Switch 2 as early as I did, was for the games that I can't play anywhere else that I do enjoy. Like Bonanza, Kirby, Mario Kart World, Pokemon, all of the things. And I'm happy with that decision. And I hope a lot of the purchasers of Switch 2s are also happy with their decision. I've heard rave reviews, at least in the content creation circle, of Mario Kart World, and I agree with them. Bonanza won't be out for another month, but even, older games like Pokemon Scarlet and Violet actually run now. So that does create a little bit of hype, hopefully, in the future for Pokemon Legends ZA, if that hopefully won't be a horrible trash game, but we'll see! There are so many things in the Nintendo world that make me excited about playing these games on the new generation Switch 2, and I believe I'm not alone in this, and that's why the launch was as successful as it was. Nintendo will always have the nostalgia card that I don't believe the other consoles or even a PC will have. Are there nostalgic games on the consoles? Yeah, I was a Crash Bandicoot kid and a Spyro kid. And again, they were PlayStation exclusives for a very long time. Now, as everything expands into multi-platform, it's hard to find exclusives because they're kind of shamed. And I still love Nintendo for keeping their IP in their house and not passing it around to everybody else. That might seem like a selfish thing, but having some uniqueness to you is important. And if every console plays every game, there's nothing fun about getting individual things. So, yeah, that's my thoughts on the Switch 2. And I don't know. Tell me your thoughts on the Switch 2. The statistics say it was a successful launch. To me, as a Switch 2 owner, I think it's a great addition to my console lineup as a streamer and business owner in the gaming community. I think Mario Kart World is worth it in the bundle, but maybe not worth it as an $80 singular game. That's just my thoughts, though, so tell me your thoughts on the Switch 2 below. Do you think it was a successful launch regardless of the statistics? Did you think it was going to flop? Are you a boycotter? Answer those questions in the comments below and create some chaos and fuckery because I'm genuinely curious to see what people think. And if it's about affording it, good on you for making financial responsible decisions. I am full of chaos and fuckery, so I enjoy not doing that. And I hope you enjoyed this little conversation about the Switch 2.